Welcome to the Robotics Through Science Fiction podcast. I'm Robin Murphy, and in this episode, I'll review Stanislaw Lem's 1987 classic novel, Peace on Earth, where the robots on the moon may or may not be staging an uprising, and it's up to one man and Robotics to find out. Stanislaw Lem was one of the most read science fiction authors in the world in his day, especially around the 70s and 80s, although not in America because there are rarely any translations from his native Polish to English. Europeans could parse the French translations. We, of course, can't parlez vous, francais. Lem famously did not like American science fiction, with a very few exceptions, one being Philip K. Dick. And it's no wonder, since Lem's Peace on Earth shares so many of the same themes that Dick covered. Militarization of robots, people losing their memory or not being who they seem to be, and government conspiracies. In some ways, Peace on Earth is like the longer, more detailed, and actually better version of Dick's 1953 short story, Second Variety, which was the basis for that Peter Weller movie, Screamers. Peace on Earth has a sort of Battlestar Galactica, the reboot, not the original one with the kids, backstory. Mankind has put all of their military robots on the moon to do whatever it is military robots do. The rapidly evolving super smart robots can continue to use simulations and machine learning to improve or to work out alternatives to Clausewitz styles of warfare, but out of the way so it can impact humans. Or can it? Because after a couple of decades, no one's heard from the robots. This is not unexpected, but people, being people, are beginning to wonder if the robots are still up there. Or maybe the robots have evolved into something peaceful, or into some supreme intelligence that might want to take over the Earth. Or maybe the robots have run out of things to shoot up there, and the winners are now thinking about shooting at Earth. Whoops, maybe we should send someone to check on them just in case. The story is told from the viewpoint of the astronaut, Ijan Teki, who's sent in to check in on the robots. The book starts out with his return on Earth with brain damage that has severed his corpus callosum and left him with major memory loss as to what's happened and why he's on the run. We are in Christopher Nolan Memento territory without the tattoos, or Jonathan Nolan HBO Westworld's out-of-sequence storytelling as Teki tries to figure out what happened on the moon and what it all means. Along the way, we get some interesting descriptions of telerobotics and telepresence, as well as swarm and distributed robotics. Lem was a hard science fiction writer who had gone to medical school before switching to physics. He was very much into the scientific component of his books, and in this case, more of the ideas about biological evolution. He posits that biological evolution has been about the evolution of small to large, from viruses and bacteria to single cells to animals and people, but that robotic evolution will be from large to small. We started with big robots, improving them, and then getting them smaller with the miniaturization of sensors and actuators, and then smaller computation, as a single robot would not need to carry out all of its computation on board, but could rely on distributed computation. And the trend will continue until finally a robot becomes a collection of tiny, simple robots that can cast itself into a larger shape with greater intelligence. The idea behind Michael Crichton's novel Prey. These swarms of what we now call nanorobots would provide the ultimate flexibility in reconfigurable robots. Of course, Lem hand waves over limiting factors such as power and communication, but that aside, it's a thought-provoking idea and a radically different take on Dick's on how military robots would evolve. One of the most interesting scientific themes on Peace on Earth is Teki's use of teleoperated robots to land on the moon and to attempt to check out the robots in the different sectors of the moon. Eventually, Teki quits using humanoid robots and begins using a reconfigurable robot body that can transform into different animal shapes so as to move more effectively through the different structures built by the robots. Robots are sometimes called avatars. So the term avatar was originally restricted to software simulations. James Cameron, of course, changed that connotation with his movie. There is increasing interest in telecommuting and telesex through robots, so much so that there's now an X Prize competition on avatars. My favorite shape that Techie's teleoperated robot took on was that of a dachshund. And here's where Lem underestimated the scientific challenges of teleoperation. Lem focused on the physical science, how the avatar might reconfigure into a new shape. He assumed that Techie would have little difficulty adjusting to the new shape with 4 legs because Techie would be wearing a suit that sensed his body movements. Except this ignores the human-robot interaction component. How does Techie know how to move like a dog and synthesize perception from angles much lower than a human normally sees? The degrees of freedom are different. The movement patterns are different. The location of the sensors are different. Operators currently get rapidly fatigued with humanoid robots, and there's a one-to-one correspondence between the human and robot and no change in size. So the cognitive load for trying to control a 4-legged animal would be huge. It's hard to imagine that Techie would be successful without an intermediary intelligent assistant program that would translate his intent into the appropriate motions for the current shape. And that type of assisted AI is a hard, open research question. By the way, the X Prize from ANA, sponsoring the Japanese airline company, the ANA Avatar competition is making a similar assumption that if you build a humanoid avatar, it'll be easy and natural for a human to control. That hasn't been supported by decades of research in telerobotics, and the humanoid robots in the DARPA Robotics Challenge often required multiple operators. But back to Peace on Earth. It's a very readable book, jam-packed with scientific ideas that were ahead of its time, combined with a serious jab at the stupidity of the nuclear arms race that was in progress at the time. More importantly, Lem foresaw a world in which robots could be a threat, though politicians were a bigger threat, and were also a solution to the threat. A refreshing take on robotics in the New World Order. What a shame Lem has been relatively unknown in the U.S. You should really read this one, especially if you like hard science fiction or if you want to get beyond the U.S. viewpoint of sci-fi.